Here is the anatomy of the ear. The ear contains structures both for hearing and equilibrium. It is divided into three regions: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. We'll start by looking at the outer ear, or the external ear, which consists of three parts: the pinna, the external auditory canal, and the tympanic membrane. The pinna, otherwise known as the auricle, is a shell-shaped structure composed primarily of elastic cartilage that surrounds the opening to the external auditory canal. The external auditory canal extends until you reach the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is a thin sheet of epithelium and connective tissue that separates the outer ear from the middle ear. The middle ear consists of three parts as well: the oval window, the round window, and the pharyngotympanic tube. The oval window transmits vibrations from the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane receives vibrations from the auditory ossicles, which there are three of: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The round window has a role in allowing the perilymph and the cochlea to vibrate. The pharyngotympanic tube, otherwise known as the auditory tube, connects the middle ear to the pharynx, or the throat, and equalizes pressure in the middle ear. In the inner ear, which is our sense of hearing and equilibrium, it consists of cavities called the bony labyrinth. The bony labyrinth are filled with fluid, which is the perilymph, and the bony labyrinth consists of three parts: the vestibule, the cochlea, and the semicircular canals. Within the perilymph is a series of membranes, which are called the membranous labyrinth. They are filled with a thicker fluid, which is called the endolymph. The three bony regions of the bony labyrinth are the vestibule, the semicircular canals, and the cochlea. The vestibule houses two structures responsible for static equilibrium, which is when the body is not moving but the head is tilted. The saccule and the utricle transmits impulses down the vestibular portion of the vestibular cochlear nerve. The semicircular canals house semicircular ducts and the ampullae. They work together with organs of the vestibule to maintain equilibrium, rotational equilibrium, which is the ability to maintain balance when the body or the head is moving. Just like the vestibule, the semicircular canals transmit impulses down the vestibular portion of the vestibular cochlear nerve. The cochlea is a spiral bony canal that contains the cochlear ducts. Located within the cochlear duct is a spiral organ which has specialized hair cells that depolarize in response to sound wave vibrations. The cochlea has a hole in it, which is called the round window, that allows the perilymph to vibrate.
We're going to be talking about the eye. First, we're going to go over the accessory structures of the eye. They consist of the eyebrows, eyelids, conjunctiva, lacrimal apparatus, and eyelashes. The eyebrows, they help shade the eyes from sunlight and prevent sweat from trickling down the forehead from reaching the eyes. The eyelids are a thin layer of skin that covers and protects the eye. The eyelid muscles are activated reflexively to cause blinking every 3 to 5 seconds to protect the eye from foreign objects. Every time we blink, secretions such as oil, mucus, and saline solution spread across the eyeball surface, keeping the eyes moist. And also projecting from the eyelids are eyelashes. They are richly innervated by nerve endings. Anything that touches the eyelashes triggers reflex blinking. Conjunctiva is a transparent mucous membrane. It lines the eyelids and folds back over the anterior surface of the eyeball. The main function of the conjunctiva is to produce a lubricating mucus to keep the eyes from drying out. Next is the lacrimal apparatus. Consists of the lacrimal gland and the ducts that drain lacrimal secretions into the nasal cavity. The main purpose of the lacrimal apparatus is to produce tears, channel them to the surface of the eye where they maintain moisture, and flush debris and water material from the ocular surface. Extrinsic eye muscles control the movement of each eyeball. They allow the eyes to follow a moving object to help maintain the shape of the eyeball and hold it in orbit. Structures of the eyeball consist of the fibrous layer, the vascular layer, the retina, and the lens. The fibrous layer is composed of two different regions. Both regions are composed of dense avascular connective tissue. The first region is known as the sclera. It is known as the white of the eye. Its tough tendon-like material protects and shapes the eyeball and provides a sturdy anchoring site for the intrinsic eye muscles. The cornea is a transparent layer that forms a window that lets light enter the eye. It's a major part of the light-bending apparatus of the eye. The vascular layer consists of the choroid layer, the ciliary body, and the iris. The choroid is a blood vessel-rich, dark brown membrane. Its blood vessels nourish all the eye layers. Its brown pigment produced by melanocytes help absorb light, preventing it from scattering and reflecting within the eye. This layer has a posterior opening where the optic nerve leaves the eye. The ciliary body has three parts. Ciliary muscles make up most of the ciliary body and consist of interlacing smooth muscle bundles that control lens shape. Ciliary processes is the posterior surface of the ciliary body has radiating folds. It secretes fluid that fills the cavity of the anterior segment of the eyeball. Ciliary zonule extends the ciliary process to the lens. This halo of fine fibers encircles the circumference of the lens and helps hold it in its upright position. It also transmits tension from the ciliary muscle to the lens. Next is the iris. The iris is the colored part of the eye. Shaped like a flattened donut, it lies between the cornea and the lens and is continuous with the ciliary body posteriorly. Its main functions are to transport nutrients, ions, and water. Also, it absorbs light to prevent it from scattering. Next, we're going to be moving on to the retina. It's the innermost layer of the eyeball. This develops from an extension of the brain. It contains millions of photoreceptors that convert light energy, other neurons involved in processing response to light and glia. This consists of two layers, the pigmented layer and the neural layer. The pigmented layer is the outer pigmented layer is a single cell thick lining. It is next to the choroid and extends anteriorly to cover the ciliary body and the posterior face of the iris. These pigmented cells, like those of the choroid, absorb light and prevent it from scattering into the eye. The neural layer is a transparent inner layer and is composed of three main types of neurons: photoreceptors, bipolar cells, and ganglion cells. Signals are produced in response to light and spread from photoreceptors to the bipolar cells, and then the innermost ganglion cells, where action potentials are generated. The 250 million photoreceptors found in the neural layer are of two subtypes, rods and cones. The rods are dim light peripheral vision receptors. They are more abundant and more sensitive. Cones are our vision receptors for bright light and provide high resolution color vision. Last but not least, there's a lens. It's a transparent, flexible structure that can change shape to precisely focus the light rays that pass through it and into the retina in order to create clear images of objects that are positioned at various distances.
Next, we'll be going over the chemical sense, smell. For us to smell, it must be at a gaseous state as it enters the nasal cavity. Olfactory epithelium is a yellow patch of pseudostratified epithelium. Supporting cells make up the bulk of penny-thin epithelial membrane. Olfactory cilia increase the receptive surface area and they lie flat on the nasal epithelium. They're also covered by a thin sheet of mucus. Filaments of the olfactory nerve are slender, non-myelinated axons of the olfactory sensory neurons. Physiology of smell. Activation of receptors, dissolved odorants stimulate olfactory sensory neurons by binding to receptor proteins. Transduction to impulses. Odorants use a receptor linked to a G protein. G proteins activate enzymes that synthesize salicylic AMP, which causes cation channels to open, allowing sodium and calcium to enter. Olfactory pathways. Olfactory bulbs are at distal ends of the olfactory tracts. Mitral cells in glomeruli are the second-order sensory neurons. Olfactory tracts allow impulses to flow down to the piniform lobe of the olfactory cortex. Homeostatic imbalances. Anomalous, which means without smell, results from head injuries that tear the olfactory nerves, or could be caused by after effects from nasal inflammation. It could also be caused by neurological disorders like Parkinson's. Effects of zinc can cause loss of your sense of smell, and Unicate fits are a form of temporal lobe epilepsy, in which hallucinations of taste and smell and inappropriate chewing movements are prominent features. Sound and mechanisms of hearing. Properties of sound. Amplitude is the sound's intensity. Frequency is the number of waves that pass a given point in any given time. Sound transmission to the inner ear. Sound waves entering the external acoustic meatus strike the tympanic membrane. The motion of the tympanic membrane transfers to the oval window by the ossicle lever system. As the stapes moves back and forth against the oval window, it moves the perilymph. Resonance of basilar membrane. When a particular frequency is reached and fibers near the oval window become short and stiff, they result in the basilar membrane to mechanically process sound signals before they reach the receptors. Excitation of hair cells and organ of corti. Hairs that move along with basilar membrane. The hairs open and close ion channels and generate electrical signals. Auditory pathway includes your hair cells, your medulla, your inferior colliculus, your thalamus, and the auditory cortex and the temporal lobe. The auditory pathway transmits auditory info primarily from the cochlear receptors to the cerebral cortex. Auditory processing is when a difference in sound wavelengths is great enough for you to differentiate two separate and distinct tones. Pitch perception is sound that has multiple frequencies and activates several cochlear hair cells and cortical cells simultaneously, and we perceive multiple tones. Detection of loudness is the louder sounds cause larger movements of the tympanic membrane, auditory ossicles, and the oval window. the pressure of the waves of greater amplitude in the fluids of the cochlea. Localization of sound is when several brainstem nuclei help us to localize a sound source by the means of two cues, relative intensity and relative timing. Homeostatic imbalances would include deafness, which is any hearing loss. It can be classified as conduction or sensorineural deafness, according to its cause. Conduction deafness is when something disrupts sound conduction to the fluids of the inner ear. Sensorineural deafness is damage to neural structures. Tinnitus is ringing of the ears, and Meissner syndrome affects 3 parts of the internal ear.
Ooh, is it?
Just so that way, like, we went over it, yeah?
Yeah.
You have created all those?